You are listening to Prevention is the New Cure, all things health and NHS with a political twist.
That's with me, Dr. Helen Stokes-Lampard, and with Steve Brine, former MP and chair of the Health Select Committee.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Steve. Great to be here.
Nice to see you. This is episode 35. We have a guest today, which we'll introduce shortly. But just looking back last time, we did a big general election wrap up. I've had so much feedback from people who really enjoyed our wrap as to the outcome of the general election, obviously, and the people in post in the different positions in the new Department of Health, and how the opposition then stacks up. Victoria Atkins is as a shadow health secretary and moves from being the health secretary to the shadow. Not an easy thing to do. And what everyone's been saying about health and prevention we talked about. So thanks to everyone for the feedback on that. It seemed like a fun episode, Helen.
Yeah, it was actually. It was an interest. It was a slightly different one. Not many of those. Not many post-election wrap-ups we get to do in a podcast year. So yeah, and time just flew by. But interestingly, I have to say, I'm quite pleased. A lot of what we talked about has some subsequently come to pass. And the Secretary of State has been extremely busy in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so you were talking about Darzi, weren't you? You were talking about our Darzi and the Darzi work
Mm.
from several years, quite a few years ago, and he's back with a vengeance and doing some of this review work into the NHS. Now, again, I don't know what that means. We've also had sort of conversations about the Times reporting there's going to be a royal commission on social care, which I think some people will sigh deeply at because that could push it into, the end of this parliament or even the next. But yeah, you were prophetic with your Darzi work there last week, Helen.
Well, I'm not sure how much was prophetic and how much was just reading the runes and the tea leaves. That was, people. If people like Lord Darcy are wandering around DH, they're probably not there for the quality of the coffee. Let's face it. Anyhow,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
this.
Now we talk about this podcast having a political twist, don't we? And there has been a political twist across the pond in recent hours. Obviously, last weekend we had this attempted assassination of Donald Trump, where he had a bit of a near miss, didn't he?
Oh, didn't he just? I mean, the close proximity of that bullet just grazing the top of his ear. I mean, you're only talking a centimeter or so different, to his, left would have just made so to the left, as we look at it on TV, would be to the right. Would have just absolutely been fatal. And I think um, there's no doubt that he was extremely lucky. There's no doubt that mistakes were made from the security point of view. That's probably not the brief for us on the podcast. But in terms of health and disease prevention for the world, I think there's no doubt that it's just massively enhanced his chances of getting elected in November. And that has global implications, which in turn will have implications for health and well-being in the UK.
Yeah, and of course, overnight, we're recording this on Monday morning. Overnight, of course, the news has come out that the inevitable news, of course, that President Biden, Joe Biden, won't seek the Democratic nomination, won't stand again. I put out a tweet last night, Helen, and maybe this is controversial, but I said that I think the US and the UK media have been complicit in a conspiracy of silence in recent years, where just reporting ad nauseum, not questioning White House lines that says Joe's fine. The BBC last week reporting that Starmer was over there, met with Joe Biden. Joe Biden's on top form, and they just report this. When I think it's been very obvious for a long time, my American friends have been saying how worried they are about Joe Biden. And I just wonder, if somebody walked into your consulting room with Joe Biden's gait, and having had a parent who I lost to Parkinson's, there are familiarities there, right? To the walk, which is not just a historic knee injury, which is one of the lines that came out of the White House, the masked expression, the vacant stare at times. Okay, I'm not a clinician. We don't know President Biden, and you've certainly not, that I know of, consulted him as his physician. But
No.
just from observing what you observe as a physician, what do you see, Helen? What do you see?
You're not leading me anywhere at all there with this one, Steve, are you? But no, look, I have to say, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's very easy when you see people day in, day out to not notice changes. But as soon as you look back at footage of President Biden 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, you do see fairly significant changes. And the things you've observed, yes, the shuffling gait, the lack of expression when he's not actively speaking, do they are striking. I mean, he doesn't have a coarse classic tremor, but Parkinson type conditions present in all sorts of ways. So that is possible. It is just possible that these are aging effects, and the shuffling gait does commonly happen with people over time. And there are 100 possible reasons, and sort of a Parkinsonian type diagnosis is just but one of them. To be honest with you, I am I am just relieved that this point has come so that American politics can move on. It's felt very messy over the last couple of months. And I know many people that I care about and respect, a lot of medics in the States have been truly worried about this. And I think clarity will be good for American politics. I mean, it should make for a very interesting fight in the coming months. And whether Vice President Kamala Harris gets the nomination or not, it's going to make what's going on across the pond very interesting.
Indeed, indeed. Well, look, I mean, we wish the outgoing president well. I guess, if it was your relative, you'd say, look, come on, you've had a great run. You've been president of the United States. Let's spend some time with the grandchildren. And we wish him well. Back to home.
Just to say,
we were just going to talk about this. Yeah.
I was going to say, I also do wish former President Trump well in terms of recovery from his shooting. I mean, he did look visibly shaken when he first appeared back on the stage. We shouldn't underestimate what it will have taken out of him and the presence of mind he would have had to be able to raise a fist and turn, such a terrifying moment into a moment of political opportunism with quite remarkable composure. So whatever you think of his politics, kudos to him for managing to keep the presence of mind while all that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a father, he's a husband, and yeah, he's a human being at the end of the day. So back here at home, we had this IT outage last
Oh.
week, didn't we? Which was caused by a faulty software update. Some of the stuff online, with Liz Truss pictured at her first day in the new job, were cruel. But there was nothing funny about what happened. And I just wanted to try and understand from you. It's CrowdStrike, isn't it? The security firm that did this dodgy upload. Trains, we had Sky News off the air. Some may say it's a good thing. All sorts of problems. Supermarkets were cash only, but it affected the health service in a big way, didn't it? And I just wonder, out in GP land, what was your experience then? And still,
Yeah.
what's your experience?
Well, actually, as you say, we're recording this on Monday morning, and I'm keeping one eye on the practice doctors WhatsApp group because it is still causing serious problems. So the first I knew about it was actually when the practice WhatsApp group lit up with concerns about computing, something was going on, anybody with practice laptops to bring them in urgently, and then gradually realizing that this was all linked to the national issue, the global issue, sorry, with CrowdStrike. I have to say, I have never seen or was completely unaware that CrowdStrike had anything to do with the EMIS software that the majority of GP practices use in England, well, in the United Kingdom, actually. It's the biggest patient software package. It was developed by GPs themselves in the 1980s, and it is a really awesome, incredibly powerful piece of kit. But of course, the fact all EMIS practices were then brought to a standstill is pretty horrendous and serious. And I mean, this on top of the issue that happened, which was a hack probably about a month ago now in South London, does give very serious concerns about the security of IT infrastructure going forward. Anyway, the issues are grumbling on, but everyone is working hard. It's a case of a lot of rebooting of systems. I think there's no compromise or risk to patient data or anything like that. It's just you couldn't access patient records, couldn't book anybody in. And so it was lots of bits of paper and telephones. And even most telephone systems were digital, but they weren't affected, is my understanding.
Yeah, goodness me. Just shows how reliant we are, doesn't it, on the technology? And GPs will have been popping their head round into the waiting room, old school style. Although mine still does that actually. We were going to talk about the state opening of Parliament, weren't we, as well? Because obviously that's happened since we last chatted, which is
Oh.
the King's speech now, and it's all the legislation that the government will do during this session of Parliament. That might be a year, it might be 18 months. Not entirely sure. Prevention got a good mention, which is good. So
Good, good.
I think the words were commitment to improve NHS as a service for all, providing care on the basis of need, specifically plans to reduce waiting time, focus on prevention. So the King is a listener to this podcast, Helen. So the bills that were sort of of relevance to us that were confirmed in the King's speech, the tobacco and vapes bill is back, which obviously we are pleased about. And then finally, this reform to the Mental Health Act. They're the two the Department of Health Social Care bills. And obviously, we've spoken about the tobacco bill many times, but great to see that back, strengthened, I hope.
Yeah, it's a really good list. I mean, there's a load of other things on there which will have an impact on health, like cybersecurity, conversion practices, and children's well-being. But you're right, those two are our big ones for us on the podcast. And the tobacco and vapes, yeah, we've talked about it many times. I don't think we need to cover it again. Um, but there was also the mental health bill. Really pleased to see that this was coming through. I mean, this had been working through before and then got delayed, but it builds on work by a dear friend of mine, Professor Simon Wesley, did a massive review which must have concluded 2 or 3 years ago now, to basically rebuild the Mental Health Act of 1983 to give people greater choice and autonomy who've got serious mental issues. So that's good. And the last thing I wanted to flag with you, Steve, is that there was also mentioned there were going to be greater restrictions on advertising of fast food and high energy drinks for children, which is something you've worked hard on in the past. We've been calling on the podcast for a long time. So again, I think somebody in the new government, the DH, is listening to what we say. Who knew?
I think they are. I hope so. You could argue that they listen more now than they should when I was the minister there. But I mean, I think look, the thing about the advertising of HFSS is is good news. It doesn't actually require primary legislation. It's a regular regulation change. It was something that, look, if I'm honest, the Conservative Downing Street backed away from. I tried to do it when I put it in the child obesity plan, and it struggled in right round. Maybe a certain former female prime minister did not like it, and spoke against it in cabinet, as I understand. And that that's fine, but it didn't get us any further forward. So I would expect them to go forward with this. I think what they're going to need to do though is build the evidence base up again and just restate the evidence base. And then after they've done it, we want to see some figures so that they keep justifying the fact that it's the right thing to do. And I know they'll have lots of support from people like Jamie Oliver when they do that, which will help win the political argument. But I think you need to keep winning the clinical argument that changes to advertising restrictions will impact on public health in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, that was wonderful, Steve. If we should talk a little bit about public sector pay, because there was also conversation about that over the weekend.
Oh, yes. So the bee that is in my bonnet, Helen, around public sector pay is that, what should happen is that the remit should go to the pay review body from the government in the autumn, September, October each year. The pay review body should then do their work. They should report to the government early in the new year. It should be announced in the spring budget as part
Yes.
of the budgetary process. We've got off track on this in recent years. It goes back to Boris Johnson's government and then the different changes of leadership. In that, what we are now talking about is a pay review body process that should have concluded in the spring, so that at the start of the new financial year, and any pay award that is announced will be backdated. Of course, this is very frustrating for public sector workers, and it's very hard for hospital chief executives, for instance, to plan. So what we're talking about here is teachers, and the reason the ministers are saying that, or the media are saying that, some NHS workers is because, as I understand it, it's those that are on the agenda for change pay scales. So what it looks like the pay review body are going to recommend is 5.5%. I think the last government had put 2.5% to 3% in the budget in the figures. So if the government do want to go to 5.5%, then they're going to have to find the money. But that's it, Helen. Government's about choices. Just finally on this, one thing I really liked Rachel Reeves saying was that there is, of course, a cost to meeting the pay review body, but there is also a cost to not, because then you have people leaving profession, and you have the cost of agency locum staff. So I think she's smart on that, but ultimately she's going to defy economic gravity. She wants to do it and get the political credit for doing so. She'll have to find the money.
Yeah, I mean, this causes chaos, certainly for general practices, which generally get forgotten in this. I mean, we have to pay our staff. We're not tied to Agenda for Change, but if we don't keep up with Agenda for Change pay rises, then obviously we lose our staff into secondary care. Because if you can be a fantastic receptionist or administrator in general practice, you can be a fantastic one in your local hospital too. And we have, as you know, general practice got 1.9% pay award this year, which doesn't even cover the uplift for lower paid staff on minimum wage. So it's just horrendous. And I mean, we talk about crisis in health and care. We've got awful stories of fully qualified GPs that we've been begging for, that we've been training up, and now nobody can employ them because everyone's having to spend their money on other salaries and stuff because the uplifts haven't flown. So it is a very messy pickle which has to be unpicked in the coming months. And I don't envy Rachel Reeves, but she does seem to be incredibly sensible and straightforward about it all, which I think is a good thing.
Right, okay, let's take a break and then we'll come back and you're going to introduce our special guest.
Well, welcome back. I'm absolutely delighted that a good friend and a colleague that I respect hugely is joining us this week. A huge welcome, Gemma Peters, who is the dynamic chief exec of Macmillan Cancer. Great to have you with us on the podcast this week.
Lovely to see you, Helen. Lovely to see you, Steve. Thanks for inviting me on.
Hi, Gemma. I've never been described as dynamic at the start of this podcast, and I was just wondering what was the trick to that, Gemma? Is there something I need to be doing, do you think?
I think it's all about the hair, to be honest, Steve. I think if your hair's looking great, then that's what happens.
Well, we're recording this on Monday morning. Would I say it's a good hair day? No, my 16-year-old's still in bed. When she gets up, I'll ask.
All right, good. It looks good from here.
Hey, Gemma, look, it's great to have you join us. Can I just ask, we're now, 10 days or so following the new government. We've got some new ministers in place. Steve and I have spent a lot of time talking about that. How are you and Macmillan feeling about the future for people living with cancer?
Thanks, Helen. What a question. I mean, I think we're feeling all the emotions, I think it's probably fair to say. There's some really positive early signals from this new government, but I think the thing I am most excited about is the prospect that this government, because of their majority, will be able to take a long-term view on cancer. And I think, you and Steve both know well that actually the challenges, which are real and very difficult for people with cancer in the UK, require long-term, actually cross-party thinking about how it is that we can better serve people and change around some of the outcomes we're seeing. And that's always going to take multi-years. So the fact we're talking about a 10-year plan, I think, is hugely positive. I really liked the message around this is going to be Department of Health and Social Care is going to be an economic growth department as well. And the reason for that is that takes you into the space of thinking about people and as a whole, not just a disease. And I think that's one of the things at Macmillan we feel really strongly about. Many of us, 3 million of us at the moment have cancer, 4 million by 2030. We're whole people that are contributing and able to contribute in many ways to society. We're much more than just that diagnosis. So I think that was positive. I suspect you and I, Helen, both were excited about the kind of talk of more to away from hospital, more to community.
Yeah,
as a focus that feels right. And I think, for me, there have been strong signals about working collaboratively with the voluntary sector, with the community sector, with the corporate world too. Like, we're all going to have to pull together to fix this stuff, and that feels positive. So good early start, but this is a challenging brief and there's a lot to do, and as with all governments, we stand ready to work with them to do what's right for people with cancer.
Thanks, Gemma.
You were saying, you remember in the last Parliament, the Select Committee were doing their future cancer work, and one of the things that was going to be the headline, I suppose, of the recommendations there was that there needs to be a new cancer strategy, a new 10-year cancer strategy, which was being resisted by the last government because they were insisting on the major condition strategy with cancer as part of it. And as you know, we took a very different view to that, which I know you did too, and in fact the entire cancer community did. But let's go back to brass tacks, because obviously what you're talking about is the whole person and people with cancer being part of the economy. You're absolutely right, and we're all about people living well after cancer. It's not just a matter of surviving it. You then go on to lead a normal life. But going back to brass tacks here, obviously what we got to do is detect it, prevent it if we can, which we'll come on to, detect it as early as possible, and then treat it smartly when we detect it. And I guess, Macmillan have done a lot of work in this space. You've talked a lot to Select Committee about that. What do you want to hear from the new Cancer Minister, the new Health Secretary around preventing it and detecting it early?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what you say there is right. And we talked a lot about it, didn't we, at the select committee? So the first thing is I have not changed my position that a cancer strategy, a 10-year cancer strategy is absolutely essential. And I don't see that as in conflict with looking at multimorbidity and multi-conditions. Like 70% of people with cancer have another condition. So being able to think about how these interact is really important. But the progress that we've been able to make in health in this country has often been driven by cancer, and that's what I think we need to do again. So we've got more data in cancer, there are more charities in cancer, there's more understanding of cancer. It's the defining health issue. The currently 65% of us either have cancer or someone in our immediate family has cancer. Like there's no other disease like that. It's still the biggest cause of death. So starting with cancer, but doing that work on that strategy in a way that allows you to learn for other conditions, which is what we've done in the past, remains for me absolutely critical. So I suppose that's the first thing that I'd say. It hasn't changed, and I think you're right. That's the way the select committee were heading, and I hope that gets picked up again. And to pick up the point about sort of human-centred care or personalised care, is that for Macmillan, like since we were founded, it's all been about seeing the person and understanding what matters to them and supporting them through their journey, whatever that journey is. And we hope, like you've said, for the majority of people, that is living well through your treatment and beyond. That will never be the case for everybody, and dying well and having choices at that stage of life is also really, and death is really, really important to us too. So I think that view, which I think comes from taking a wider view of what the health system is, that says, here's a person, let's understand what matters to you, and then let's work out what all the resources are that are available that could wrap around you at the points at which you need them. And I think one of the exciting things about thinking about that from a prevention perspective or from a health and social care perspective is often what matters to you isn't necessarily the thing that's about your disease. It might be about how you talk to your children. It might be about how you're going to put food on the table if you're the only breadwinner. It might be about, had this last week talking to someone, how are you going to make the 3 buses that it takes you to get to your chemotherapy in time for your 9 a.m. appointment because it doesn't work. Those are the things that get in the way of people showing up and having the best life that they can. And you can't solve those in a hospital. You have to solve those in the community, and you have to understand what it is, the support that people need in the community. So I think that's also true for the work that needs to happen upstream in terms of prevention. We need to think about what is it that enables people to live their best life before they get a disease. And many of those things are the same things that help you live your best life with disease. So in that sense, I'm very, of course, as an organisation, we're very pro prevention. I'm always mindful, though, if thinking of anything as the only answer, and particularly when there are so many people who have cancer today for whom prevention is now off the table, we need to really think about how it is that we support people who will still continue to get cancer for many decades to come. So it can't only be about prevention, but it absolutely has to be part of the conversation about how we become a healthier society, which is what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely, Gemma. I mean, you nailed it. And I think you're right. There is no one solution to any of this stuff. It's all hugely complex and an interplay of everything. It brings me on quite nicely to the challenge about integrated care systems and personalising care. Any thinking you've been doing there that you want to share with us?
Yes, so this is all about how you can join up systems to support an individual. So one of the things I think if I were in government would be really attractive to me is it's not necessarily about more resource, it's about marshalling resource in the best way. But when you start to look at what the barriers to that, you get to some things which feel quite complicated. It's about where the money sits and where the benefit sits and how the data moves. And if you could solve those 2 things, we'd have a much better way of wrapping around individuals. So if I share for you a couple of examples. So Macmillan's been doing some work in Scotland, and it started in Glasgow with Glasgow City Council, and it's called Improving the Cancer Journey. So outcomes for people with cancer in Glasgow were not great. Lots to do with lots of inequity, big deprived populations. And we worked with the City Council to say, what would it take to reconfigure how people with cancer are supported, So what happens is if you get a diagnosis with cancer in Glasgow, you are proactively contacted, like an appointment is scheduled for you with a care navigator. And that is someone, they're not clinically trained, it's someone they are incredibly empathetic, passionate, caring people who are very skilled, but they're not clinical. And they talk to you about, after your diagnosis, what matters to you at the moment. And those conversations can cover all sorts of things, from all the things we talked about: housing, jobs, pain, mental health, a whole range of things. And those people are plugged into what the council is able to offer, what the community sector and charity sector is able to offer, and what the clinical offer is. And they navigate for people. So, for instance, they might help someone get their blue badge. They might connect them to a community group who'll do their shopping. They might contact their CNS for them and say they're still worried about pain, or they haven't understood that trial. And the CNS, clinical nurse specialist, would then get back in contact with them, and they stay by the side of that person through the whole of their cancer journey and help them as they move through different stages of treatment back into the community. And the outcomes from that have been incredible in terms of people's experience. So even in situations where people's diagnosis is getting a lot worse, how they feel and how they're able to operate in the world goes up, because they feel safer and secure and held, and they feel that someone understands them. And of course, being able to offer that in culturally appropriate ways, in the right languages, all of those things is an important part of that service. So when you go and see it, you think, oh my God, this is the answer. Why isn't this everywhere? This would be transformative. And the reason is because of how the money moves.
I was going to ask about the money.
That's why it isn't everywhere. Yeah. Because yes, of course, you see benefits.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. So we can see that people who are in this service have fewer GPs appointments while they're going through their journey, because they know how to get support. They're being navigated to other support. They're more likely to turn up for their appointments, so there are fewer missed appointments. Their mental health is better, so they are able to contribute to society. They're more likely to stay in work. So we can see all of those things, but there's not a single financial benefactor of it. So who's going to fund all the upfront cost? So Macmillan were part of funding all the upfront cost in that example, but we can't do that everywhere. So for it to be everywhere, we need to have a way that we can see the whole benefit to society and make decisions that allow us to do work like this, where it isn't the case that the chief finance officer of the NHS Trust hasn't suddenly got loads of money because this exists, nor is the chief executive of the council. However, they are both benefiting. Nor primary care, but they're benefiting too.
And that's why you need the cancer strategy, because that needs to be owned cross-government. And I guess, the challenge for Wes as the new health secretary will be to making sure, as I know from being cancer minister, is to make sure that the work you're doing in the department is owned at the heart of government in Downing Street as well. And obviously that becomes difficult because events take over, and you've got world events that distract the Prime Minister. But we need this owned at the heart of government. Can I ask you about the NHS England cancer waiting times, which came out a couple of weeks ago, didn't they? The latest ones, which were, still very challenging. And you responded to that, and they showed that people are still waiting, way too long to be diagnosed with cancer to start treatment. I think 2 of the 3 national cancer waiting time targets were missed again, against the 62-day target. How are you reflecting on that at the moment? Because, ultimately, that is how the sector and the media judge the government's performance in this area. Just wondered if you wanted to give voice to your response to those waiting times the other day.
Yeah, so frustrating and depressing and not surprising. Last year we saw the worst ever delays in starting treatment, and it's not getting better. And this, we all know this, behind each of those statistics are families and people, often who are calling them Macmillan support lines, who are in a dreadful place, who are worried and anxious and fearful. And that's not a good way to start your treatment. But it makes things worse. The stories of people who turn up and have things cancelled, all of that. So I And lots of it is put at the door of COVID, but we know there were challenges, really serious challenges before COVID. So it comes back to exactly what we were talking about, which is these are long-term challenges. They relate to workforce. We've got an absolute crisis in cancer nursing. We've got so many people who are leaving the profession. We've got people who are scheduled to leave and take early retirement. All of these problems, and we're not recruiting fast enough. So all of these problems add up to service problems and delays for people with cancer. And what that means is people are more anxious. It means they have fewer options when they get to being treated, and that they feel worse through their journey. So it's really painful, and I welcome that we're focused on it, but I'll say what I say all the time to these things, which is it's not the only statistic that matters. And what matters is the whole. And there are examples of some projects where actually people can wait and that not necessarily be a bad thing. Actually people can, there's lots of work around prehabilitation that actually you can put interventions in that mean that people's experience then when they're treated is better. There are clearly some cancers and diagnoses where it's the most important thing. How quickly are you diagnosed is the most important thing, and how quickly do you start treatment post that diagnosis is the most important thing. So what I see day in, day out is people who work in the NHS like putting so much into their roles and to doing that in an environment where they're delivering less and less of the care that they want to deliver and the service that they want to deliver, and that is demoralizing for them, and it's dreadful for people with cancer and their families. So we have to get a grip on it, and it is going to require all sorts of things. It's going to require investment, it's going to require long-term thinking. It's going to require, as you say, join up across government to think about all the different areas that need to work to sort this out. It's going to probably require a different relationship and understanding from the public about how long they might have to wait for some things and what some of the things are you can do in that time. And we're all going to have to get on the same page and work together. And I feel like, it was quite controversial, wasn't it, when Wes came in and said the NHS is broken. And I know that people who work in the NHS felt differently about it. That some people are really concerned about it. I think the bit that is positive is we have to be clear and honest about what the problems are. And I feel that sometimes that hasn't been there. There's been a sense of, oh no, look at this number, this is okay, keep looking at this number, rather than we all want, all of us, this is the thing, this is why it should be cross-party, all of us want the same thing. Patients want the same thing, people who work in the field want the same thing, politicians want the same thing. We want to be able to deliver the very best outcomes that are possible for people with cancer. And yet we're doing lots of firing at each other and not actually coming together around long-term plans about that, and recontracting with the public about what it's going to take to fix it. It won't be next week. It's going to take time.
Thank you so much. That's a really coherent synthesis of the whole thing. Just before I hand back to Stephen, I know we've got to wrap up soon. I've declared my interest previously that I'm a trustee at Macmillan Cancer, and there are a whole raft of great cancer charities out there. Collaboration between the charities, it feels to me like there's more of a spirit of collaboration of late. Is there any sense of that from you?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's been one of the things I've been passionate about. I've worked in the sector for a long time now, is there isn't enough resource. We've got to work together and pull together. And there are so many things that we now collaborate on, and there's much more that we can do together. I think it's really important. Collaborate with each other, collaborate with community groups who aren't charities doing such important work for people with cancer, collaborate with the private sector who are trying to do more, and collaborate with government. Like that should be what organisations like Macmillan are, like spaces where people can come together, take off whatever hat it is that whoever's paying them, whatever the job is, and say, right, how do we just put the interests of people with cancer first? That's the environment that I want us to help create.
Gemma, I did wonder if you were familiar with the term goat.
Go on, tell me what it means.
Are you a goat?
I really I feel nervous.
You're being mean, Steve.
One of Steve's trick questions.
Gemma's a goat.
Go on, tell me what it means.
Gordon Brown termed the phrase government of all the talents, goat.
Oh, yeah.
And you saw different people appointed at the start of this government. So you saw James Timpson appointed Prisons
Yeah.
Minister. And I did wonder whether we might see Minister Peters in the House of Lords as the cancer minister. I mean, Andrew Gwynn is a very nice chap who is the cancer minister, and obviously he's got his heart's in the right place. He's a smart guy, and I hope you meet him soon if you don't, or if you haven't already done so in shadow form. He will be good for the brief. But I did wonder whether you'd had that tap on the shoulder, Gemma, from the Prime Minister.
I'm still waiting, Steve. Just like you didn't tap me on the shoulder when you had the chance. I'm waiting. But I'm looking forward to working with Andrew. I haven't had time with him yet, but like what you said, seems exactly what others have said too, and that he cares about this brief and he's interested in collaboration. And I haven't had time with Wes since he's been in office, but we had a fair bit of time before while he had the shadow brief. And I think similarly, he's really thinking about where are the resources that he can pull on outside government to support what's going on inside government, which, in fairness, Steve, was what you did too, and really thought about how is it that we can bring together all the resources we've got and all the people that care about this to make the biggest difference. And I think that's the only way to do it, given the scale of the problem.
Gemma, goat also means...
totally. I mean, we have got...
Actually, let me finish.
Go on.
Goat is also the greatest of all time.
Oh.
So
yes. Yes.
Anyway, sorry, carry on, Steve.
Well, we of course, Gemma, had Team Cancer, which was where we had all of the cancer community, and you were there then, of course, wearing your blood cancer hat, which is what where you used to wear. But just finally, one of the great things about Macmillan when you're a constituency MP is Friday mornings in September when you go and find the most fabulous cakes. Let's cut to the chase. Everything in moderation, of course, Doctor. But do you want to plug the Macmillan Coffee Mornings, which I think is coming up at the end of September, when you will want all the new MPs and communities to support you, because you've got to raise money, right?
Exactly. That is definitely what I want to do. I love September, Coffee Morning Month, like millions of people up and down the country get together. And what I love about it is, yes, they raise money, but people talk about cancer. And that's a lot of what we've got to do. Like, how can we have conversations about cancer so that people get support at the right time and don't feel on their own? So I love that. Also, Steve, you've reminded me that what I can say is we had our very first coffee morning last year at Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street. So I'm really hoping that Keir Starmer is going to pick up that lead and do it again. But we've yet to have that confirmed. So it would be terribly sad if we didn't get to do that again, I think.
Such fun. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, Steve.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. Absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. And good luck. Stay in touch. We'll be talking much more cancer as the new cancer strategy comes together. And I hope you'll come on again and give us your reflections on that in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Thank you. Great to talk with the two of you about it, because I know it's something you're so passionate about too. So thank you.
Bye, Gemma.
And there she goes. Off goes Gemma with her fabulous hair. Do you know what? I really like Gemma. I mean, I first met Gemma, as I said, when she used to come into the Department of Health as the chief executive of one of the blood cancer charities. And obviously she's now moved up to lead Macmillan. And she was an absolute live wire, as were a lot of the female chief executives of the cancer charities, actually. There was a lot of, I mean, the men were good too. But there were so many ladies, actually, that ran the big cancer charities. And, I think she's a real, well, you described her at the start very accurately. I thought she's a live wire, and you must enjoy working with her.
Oh, it's fantastic working with her. She's really high caliber. She really gets it. She really cares, but highly intelligent and really switched on. So yeah, absolute Gemma fans here today. So what next, Steve?
You just wanted to touch quickly on the COVID inquiry before we close.
Yeah, I did. I mean, that won't have escaped people to notice that the first report from Baroness Hallett and the inquiry team has come out this week. So this was the report on phase 1, which was looking at the country's preparedness and planning for the pandemic. There's been loads written about it. I don't think we should rehash all that. People can read it up. It was pretty damning about the planning. And I think there's a lot of concern amongst people that it's all done with the benefit of the retrospectoscope and you weren't there. But I guess just picking up on some of the themes that came out was that there was a concern that a sense of groupthink had pervaded both politicians and the civil service and the scientific community. And there was quite a lot of criticism that previous reports and recommendations that had been made were not followed up on. So there was one particular big report based on pandemic planning with a whole heap of recommendations that only 8 out of 22 were enacted. And the blame was put squarely about all the energy going into planning for a no-deal Brexit. I think for us, on a prevention point of view, Steve, surely the point we have to highlight is that another pandemic is coming, and it may not be as nice a pandemic as COVID. It could be considerably worse, and that we absolutely need to put at the top of the nation's risk register disease X and the implications for planning for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the key has to be, doesn't it, implementing recommendations. We on the former select committee looked at patient safety and all the recommendations that were made from, mid-staffs to Bristol Children's Heart Inquiry, and, the shocking number of recommendations that actually weren't implemented. And then you get another public inquiry that remakes the same recommendations. We can't have that again. Things have, of course, changed. The UK Health Security Agency, led by Dame Jenny Harries, now exists, and that is to do horizon scanning around future pandemics. So that is good. And if that hadn't been invented, I'm sure it would have been in the recommendations. But it's a really important piece of work that's gone on, and I hope that ministers present and future will take it very seriously and work it through.
Excellent. Right. Tell me, Steve, before we finish, how is the adorable Monty?
Well, Monty, my black Labrador, is fine. Did not enjoy the big heat on Friday. He was out with me in Winchester in town, actually, got himself very hot, and then was sitting on the front seat of my car because he likes to be by the air conditioning blower, but was so hot he was dribbling on the gear stick as I was driving, which was really charming, really, really charming. I know this is a theme with Monty updates, but he met a very pretty yellow lab called Carla in the river yesterday, who he stole her stick a few times, but he's thriving, but he's currently sleeping under the desk as we're recording the podcast. So Monty puppy pod is very happy.
Excellent. Well, he's a bit of a flirt, but we adore him. Right, I think that's time for us to wrap up, Steve.
It is just time for me to say podcast@stevebryant.com. Find us on all the usual social media channels, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time with episode 36. See you next time, Helen.
Bye.